Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us for our first MOA webinar of the school year, Resume, Cover Letter, and Interviewing Made Simple. My name's Erica, and I will be your host for the webinar today. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items that I would like to make you all aware of. So first, if you haven't already done so, please make sure that you have renewed your MOA membership and also encourage your colleagues to do the same. Just as a reminder, if you haven't logged into the MOA community, then I encourage you to do so. The community is a primary location for many helpful resources. And to access the community, simply visit moa.nacda.com. Also, if you have any questions regarding MOA membership in general, please don't hesitate to contact either Alexa Scott or Julie Works in the national office, and they can be reached at 440-892-4000. Again, that number is 440-892-4000. So now time for today's webinar. If you have any questions throughout the course of the live webinar, then feel free to use the chat feature on the bottom right of your screen. There will be a brief question and answer session at the conclusion of today's webinar, and so we'll address the majority of the questions at that time. Today, we are extremely fortunate to have Christy Dosh, a professional writer, speaker, sports business analyst, attorney, and author who founded Guide My Brand in 2015, a boutique publicity firm representing entrepreneurs and authors. As a sports business reporter and analyst, she has reported on everything from collective bargaining to endorsements to the finances of pro and intercollegiate athletics for many national outlets. We are fortunate to have Christy with us today, and now I will turn it over to you, Christy. If you could maybe just give a little bit of background about yourself and what motivates you professionally.
Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone who's joining live today. I'm excited to be here and chat. I do my very best to keep my foot in the door in college athletics, and so I'm always excited when I get asked to speak in front of you all, and I come to convention every year and do a resume and cover letter workshop. I believe we've done it either 5 or 6 years in a row now, so this is something I'm super passionate about. Even though I don't work in college athletics, I have worked with many professionals across college athletics over the years on resume, cover letters, on interviews, on how you can present yourself on social media, and just professional development tips that I've learned along the way. I have had an interesting sort of non-linear career path. I was a practicing attorney for almost 5 years and practiced corporate law, nothing to do with sports. I had hoped to get a job as an attorney in sports, but that did not work out very well. I'll take that back. I did get a job offer to go work in Major League Baseball out of law school. At the same time, I got a job offer to go work for a firm in my hometown of Atlanta. To be quite honest, the job in Atlanta paid 4 times what the job in sports paid, and I had law school loans. So I ended up going to work for the firm. It was an awesome experience. I loved that firm. I don't feel like I sold out. It was still something I enjoyed doing, but I missed sports. And so while I was working there, I started blogging about legal issues in sports, particularly collective bargaining in the beginning. So I primarily covered pro sports. And then I was asked to come write for Forbes in 2009. So it's been almost 10 years, and wrote for Forbes for 2 years while I was still a practicing attorney. And it was during my time there that I stumbled upon some information about the financial side of college athletics and started writing more about that. And I was so lucky to have wonderful mentors who worked in college athletics who were willing to take time with me and explain more about how college athletics works, particularly from a financial perspective, because I had never worked in a college athletics department. I went to a very small D3 in Atlanta Oglethorpe University. I then went to University of Florida for law school, but wasn't involved at all with the athletic department. And so I, am so thankful for the people who have sort of taken me under their wing along the way and taught me what they know about college athletics. In particular, Ben Jay, who when I started talking to him was at Ohio State and then went to Hawaii and is now out in San Francisco. He taught me 75% of what I know about the finances of college athletics, and it has served me really well. I ended up getting a book deal to write a book about the finances of college athletics. I was hired away from my law practice by ESPN to become their sports business reporter. I spent 2 years there. I have also written at Fox Sports, Sports Business Journal, Golf Digest, like dozens of publications. People always ask me now, who do I write for? And I say the highest bidder because I freelance a little all over the place, although I am a regular contributor at Forbes. And right there, I just got done writing a piece about an hour ago about the payouts for the college football playoffs. So still very much a passion of mine, but not a full-time job anymore. So when I left ESPN, I was recruited by a PR agency. And if you had told me when I was graduating law school that I would work in PR one day, I would have laughed. That is not at all what I had planned for myself. But I didn't want to go back to practicing law when I left ESPN, and there just aren't that many full-time sports business reporter positions. And so I went to work in this PR agency and started to build a sports marketing practice there, which I really enjoyed, and also worked on their legal marketing team, which was a great fit for me given my background, and spent a couple of years there learning more about the PR world and decided to go out on my own. I've been out on my own 3.5 years now and love it because it gives me the freedom to still write for Forbes and to still travel for some of my sports stories and to do things like this. And I don't have to ask anybody permission. I make my own schedule and I can spend my time where I choose, and I can get that dose of sports that I need while also getting to do some other things I really enjoy on the PR side with solo entrepreneurs primarily and nonfiction authors. So I continue to keep my foot in the sports door as much as I can. And I'm just really thankful to have this opportunity to speak with you all, because my favorite time of year every year is going to convention in June and getting to just be around everyone in college athletics for an entire week. And my resume cover letter workshop has been so incredible because it's allowed me to meet so many people, maybe even some of you, and to see people as they've moved along in their career. I've had people who started the first year and they were maybe a graduate student, or they were in their first or second year working in college athletics, and now they come back 5 or 6 years later and they sit on the other side of the table and they give advice to the newer folks who are coming in the room, and I get to see how they've risen in the ranks in college athletics, and it's incredibly rewarding. So I'm excited to tell you kind of some of the things I've seen over and over, and the conversations I've had with people in senior positions in college athletic departments, with ADs, with search firms, and then even with people in professional sports organizations as well, about what they see that they do and don't like. So if you've got any questions that we don't end up covering, I am more than happy to answer those. And if you don't want to ask in front of everyone, you can always get in touch with me and I will be happy to help you any way that I can. I wanted to start with just one piece of advice before Erica and I get into some of the questions, because I sat last night and I thought, what is the one thing I want to make sure that I tell them? And I have to say that the one thing that has come up over and over and over as I've done the cover letter and resume workshop, and as I've talked to people who are doing the hiring in athletics, is it really centers around this idea of setting yourself apart from everyone, whether it's in your cover letter, it's in your resume, it's verbally when you're interviewing. It's understanding what makes you unique, what you bring to the table that nobody else has, and being able to put that into words. And the way that we see it that's most effective is usually in your resume and cover letter, and then it's something you can discuss in person as well, but it's using numbers. So numbers leap off the page because we usually don't see a lot of numbers in resumes and cover letters other than like dates. And so as you, even if you aren't applying right now, as you're working, think about things you can save and put aside that can make your resume and cover letter better in the future, in terms of maybe you were part of a group that spearheaded a new campaign for women's basketball this year and you increased ticket sales 25%. Anytime you can put a number like that, a dollar number or a percentage on something that you worked on, it is so incredibly strong during the application process. Like I said, whether it's in the written document or it's in your interview, but it's something you have to remember to start documenting before you're looking for a job. So I would start piecing that, putting those little pieces of information away to use later. Maybe you add them to your resume file as you go so that it's ready when you find that job that you want to apply for. But that's the piece of advice where people are always like, oh, I wish you'd told me sooner, because they haven't been saving that. Now they got to go back and dig the data up. So that is my number one piece of advice for today, is that's something that you can start working on right away and just be cognizant of as you're doing your everyday job.
Well, Chrissy, thank you so much for, telling us about your background and, giving us that piece of advice. So, at least that gives us, the opportunity while we're, working in our fields to start gathering that, quantitative data so that we can go ahead and start adding that to our resumes. So while we're talking about resumes, one of the first things that I want to ask you is for any young aspiring administrators who are really trying to get their, foot in the door. Because, of course, there are some who maybe are already, in the sports field, maybe want to move up, or, you have some who are, like me and, maybe with your background as well, who, are not currently in the sports field, but really want to get their foot in the door into the sports field. So are there any, tips or, any steps that you can provide to help someone, kind of get their foot in the door?
Yeah, this is something I find myself discussing a lot too. If you're someone who's not working in sports yet and you want to, I would say things like internships and shadowing people are so incredibly important, even maybe informational interviews. It's you still got to immerse yourself in that world somehow. If you haven't done internships already, you're probably going to have to do some, even if you've already graduated from school. I know you're ready to get out there and start making money. But if you didn't do internships while you were in school, you're probably going to have to do them now. And that's why I really stress to students to do that while they're still students, because nobody wants to do it after they graduate. And if you're already working and you're like, I don't have time for an internship, I'm working in this other field right now, look for opportunities to volunteer or to shadow someone. So especially for events, like if you happen to live in a bigger city and something like the Final Four is going to come through town, go volunteer. All big sporting events use volunteers. Golf tournaments, the Super Bowl, the Final Four, conference championships, they all use volunteers. And that's where you can go get experience and meet people. And it takes one day, or maybe not even a whole day. It takes a few hours. So that's a great way to get your foot in the door. If there aren't those kind of volunteer opportunities readily available near you, take a look at people who are in the positions that you would eventually want to be in and reach out to them and try to either shadow them for a day or part of a day, or get them to sit down and do an informational interview with you. I found it incredibly useful when I was in law school. I did quite a few of these kind of shadow opportunities. People were usually very willing to do them because, quite honestly, not that many people ask them. And so they were usually generally they were very willing to do them. And what it actually helped me do was figure out what I didn't want to do. So I thought I wanted to be an agent, for example. And then I went and shadowed an agent for the better part of a week. He let me use my spring break to come shadow him. And I knew by the end of day one, I didn't want to be an agent. And that's valuable too, to have figured that out. So I encourage you to find those opportunities to volunteer, to shadow, to have those sit downs with people, or even intern, because it's so important to have some sort of experience you can speak to on your resume or in your cover letter, and also to be meeting people who are in the field. I'm sure you've all heard the saying about, it's all about who you know, or the flip of that some people say it's all about who knows you. You've got to get out there and be networking with the people who are in the field that you want to be in, going to conferences and events, or to smaller networking gatherings. Or a really easy way, if you don't want to leave home, is getting involved in Twitter chats. There are so many Twitter chats in the sports field. And I know like 3 people off the top of my head who just happen to be in my circle of people who have gotten jobs through sports Twitter chats. And if you don't know what a Twitter chat is, you can drop that in the questions and maybe we can chat about it more if we have time. But a great way to just network from home. So if there, it's one of those, if there's a will, there's a way. There are opportunities to get your foot in the door. And if you're already there, you're already in a position and you're looking to make that move up, I still think that it's important to be meeting with those people who are in the positions that you want to be in and learning more about how they got there and asking them questions about like what skills would be useful for you to be learning now. Maybe they'll tell you, oh, I really wish I had figured out how to use, this piece of software sooner. Okay, then you start putting the time into learning that piece of software. Get those nuggets about what you could be doing right now to put yourself in a better position for that next role that you want. And sort of lastly, the other thing I hear from people is, okay, I'm in college athletics, I work in ticket sales, but I really want to be in marketing, or I really want to be in facilities, or whatever. You've gotten in the door, but you figured out you're not in the department you want to be in. Make sure that you are volunteering with that other department. Like I hear it a lot about development. People want to be in development, but maybe they're in ticket sales. They go and they volunteer with development to make phone calls or to be at an event and be, kind of a host and welcoming people as they get there. There are always opportunities to get involved in the other departments, but you've got to get out there and talk to the people, let them know that you're interested, tell them you want to jump in and help any way that you can, and start to get that exposure to the other department. And those opportunities will often present themselves even within your own university without you having to necessarily move and leave and go somewhere else. An opportunity might open up in your department if they know you're interested in it. So make sure someone knows.
Thank you for that. And so in addition to, one getting their foot in the door, obviously, with looking for a job or even volunteering, your resume really, speaks, volumes about you. So one of the things that I want to ask is, what does a strong resume look like to you?
So generally 1 page. That's one of the biggest arguments we have with people at the resume and cover letter workshop every year. And the way that works, if you're not familiar with it, is we invite in senior level administrators and have them review cover letters and resumes for, it used to be, it was mostly graduate students, first or second year, working in college athletics. Now we get people who've been working college athletics like 4 or 5 years, 6 years even, and they're looking to make that move up and want the advice. And so we've sort of opened it up to everybody now. But I walk around the room and I listen, because you've got everybody like sitting in pairs and they're going through someone's actual cover letter and resume, or they're doing the mock interview with them right there in the room. And so I've kind of walked around and listened to that. And the general consensus is 1 page, no matter how many years of experience you have, but particularly if you're in your early years, you can't justify 2 pages. So it's sticking to 1 page. Don't get out there with like colors and fonts and like graphics, unless you're applying for maybe a graphic design position. Most other departments don't like seeing all of that. They just want to get down to who you are and what you can do, your skills, your accomplishments. And that, even when I was saying that, kind of triggered something for me. One of the things I hear people talk about over and over in that workshop, and when I've talked to senior level administrators, is that your resume shouldn't just be a list of your responsibilities in each job. It should be your accomplishments, your achievements. So that goes back to what I was talking about when I opened up about keeping track of stats and data and those things like percentage increases and dollar increases, because that will make your resume look incredibly different from everyone else's. We don't want to know what the job description looked like. When you get hired or you're looking for a job and they've got all those bullet points about what the responsibilities of the job are going to be, that's not what your resume should look like. Your past jobs, you want to show that you have that experience. So you want to have bullet points in your resume that speak to the specific experience they're looking for. But how are you different from all the other candidates who have those same things? Well, you're different because maybe you had a great idea for a campaign at your last school, or you increased ticket sales by a certain amount, or you were assigned to a specific sport and you did something, great with them. Tell us why you're different from everyone else that's applying for that position. And sometimes that can be easier to elaborate on in your cover letter, but they should be able to look at your resume and see that, yes, you meet the qualifications of the job, that you have the base skills, but they should also get an idea for how you're different from all the other clients who have those same skills. So read through your resume and ask yourself, could this look like anyone else's resume? And if the answer is yes, then you didn't provide enough detail and it wasn't unique enough. It needs to be so that when I look at it, I can't think of another person I know who could use those same things, because it should be very, very tailored to you and your individual skills and experience. So definitely make sure your resume isn't too, let's say, generic. That's a problem we see a lot of people come into the workshop with.
Okay, and thank you so much for that. And I'll use myself as an example, because with doing a resume, my biggest struggle has been, having a resume that's concise, in addition to, listing the experiences that are, relevant to the position. So, throughout, my entire, working career, maybe even for the past maybe 7 to 10 years, I've had a lot of different positions. So with keeping the resume one page, what's the best way to do that with, someone like me who's had, multiple jobs and, in addition to that, a lot of, volunteer experience as well. So what is the best way to kind of, keep things concise? Should I just, or should, one just concentrate on the skills relevant to the position, or maybe the jobs, maybe in the job that you've had maybe within the past, 2 years, 5 years? What is your advice, as far as, condensing the information to one page?
It's a good question. One thing that I've seen sort of recommended over and over, and that seems to work out well, is once you've got a lot of experience and you really feel like you're busting at the seams for your one page, as you start to apply for jobs, instead of having every job you've had in chronological order and having, 5 bullet points for every single one of them, you title the section with your jobs. Like, people usually have it titled something like experience or something like that. Title it relevant experience, and then only list the jobs that are relevant to the one that you are applying for. After you get done with that section, you can have another section that says other experience, and it can just list the company names and the job title for each of those without having any bullets. That way you're showing you didn't have gaps in employment. It's just that you're putting your most relevant experience up top, and then you're just briefly listing that other experience, which might be things like volunteer work, or maybe it was stuff you did as a student that's not as relevant today. Maybe, as a student you worked in ticket sales, but now you're in facilities. So it's not really important when you're applying for a facilities job that they see a ton of detail about those ticket sale positions that were a long time ago, and it's not really relevant to that job. So you can have them on there and just not have any bullet points for them. And I've seen people do that who have a wider breadth of experience, and it kind of covers all the bases. It gives them the most relevant of your experience, and you're going to expand and have your bullet points there. You're still listing your other jobs, just one per line, so it takes up a lot less space, and they don't need to see the bullets for those jobs because it's not as relevant. So that's one way to, and that, honestly, that's usually how I do it with my resume, depending on what I'm applying for.
Okay. And personally, of course, I'm more familiar, with using a resume. So what are your thoughts on using a resume versus using a CV?
I think it depends on what the position asks for. If it says send your resume or CV, then I would, because mine's huge, I would err towards the CV because mine's enormous. I see the CV asked for more in academic related positions. When I was teaching, I got asked for my CV quite often, and that's why I keep it up. But most positions, they prefer the resume. So what, the cover letter gives you that other opportunity to highlight things that maybe don't fit in your resume, or maybe you sort of know they aren't coming across the right way, that the way you're sort of boxed in a resume just isn't like getting across. Like for me, if somebody just saw my resume, and actually this happened to me, I was applying, it wasn't for a job, but I was applying to do some consulting, and they wanted my resume. And the woman said, she didn't know me at all, and there was no opportunity for a cover letter. It was just my resume. And when I got on the phone with her, she was like, I kind of booked the call with you just to figure out what your deal is. She was like, you were an attorney, and like then you were a broadcaster, and now you're in PR. Like her impression of me, and she was really honest and transparent with me, her impression of me was that I was like a total flake who just jumped around job to job all the time, which in my opinion is not what happened. I was practicing law. I got an offer I couldn't refuse from ESPN. It was like the offer of a lifetime to go work for them. So I did. My contract ended with ESPN. It's not like I was looking around and like got antsy and wanted to move my contract in. They didn't renew it because they had brought Darren Norvell back. And so then it was like, okay, I had to decide what I was going to do next with my life. It just so happened that a PR firm saw that I had left ESPN, and they reached out to me and had this offer for me. And so, once I explained to her how it happened and how I feel like the different pieces all play into what I do now, like when I was at the last PR agency, I was doing legal marketing. So I was still working with law firms, and this position this consulting that I was applying for actually was legal. So I was trying to explain to her, when I moved into PR, I was doing legal PR. And so it still pulled on my legal background. Plus at that point, I had been a journalist, and I knew better than anyone how to pitch a journalist to get coverage, because I knew what it was like as a journalist to get all that stuff in your inbox. I knew what it was like to have to pitch an editor on your idea. Like I understood that side of it. So then I became better at pitching journalists because I had been one, and I knew what worked and what didn't, and then I eventually left that firm and went on my own. So once we were on the phone and I could tell her all that stuff, she felt like it made perfect sense. And that's the kind of thing I would have to explain in my cover letter, because if you only saw my resume, you would have no idea what my deal was or what I liked doing. It would look like I just jumped around and that I've had like 3 completely separate careers, when really, when I can explain it to people, those careers like naturally led into each other. You can't get that on a resume. And that's why cover letters are so important. And I think a lot of people shortchange that opportunity, and they use the same cover letter for every job, and they just like swap out the first paragraph to say, how they found out about the job or what job they're applying for, but they don't personalize it, and they don't really think about how each opportunity is different, or that they're getting that opportunity to tell their full story. It is very rare I see a great cover letter. I've seen some great resumes, but I can like count on one hand the number of great cover letters I've seen. And when I've hired people, I go through cover letters first and divide it into piles of like yes, no, and maybe. So I might not even look at your resume if I don't like your cover letter. Other people think cover letters are worthless and they never look at your cover letter. So you got to be prepared. You have to have a great resume and a great cover letter, because you don't know which one they're going to put more weight on. But definitely the cover letter allows you to connect the dots and fill in the gaps that you've left on your resume, especially when you're having to edit your resume down because you've had a lot of jobs or been around a long time.
Okay, and thank you for mentioning the cover letters, because that's I'm sure a lot of us have struggled with how the format is supposed to look, how many paragraphs should we have, what should be discussed, and I believe one of the things that I've been told is maybe to address it directly to the hiring manager, I guess if you're able to find that information. So yep. Would you, elaborate a little bit more on, the format of a cover letter and, what should be included in a cover letter?
Yeah, you definitely want to try to address it to a specific person when you can, when you know who is hiring in the position, or you can find out. It's definitely great to personalize it. And then please spell their name right. You would be amazed how many people tell us that like that's where people end up in the trash can, is because they couldn't be bothered to spell their name right. So use their name and make sure you spell it correctly. And then I love cover letters. So it's funny. Some people don't even read your cover letter, but like I love cover letters. And the way that I have taught people to do cover letters, and I think I have a whole blog about this on my website, but you have your intro paragraph where you tell them what job you're applying for. You know, if you found out about it through someone, like if you can name drop somehow, great. You know, do that in the first paragraph. But the rest of it is where people get kind of stuck. Like they just tell like a chronological story of everywhere they've been and everything they've done. Or they, again, like some resumes tend to be really general and I read it and I'm like, this could be anyone. I still don't know anything about you. So what I tell people is sit down with the job description and go through all of the things it says you have to have, all those like requirements. You know, they've got them all bulleted in a list in like every job description you ever see. Go through that and circle all of the ones that like you've got great examples for. As you're reading through the requirements, you're like, oh yeah, I've done that before. You know, anything where you've got like a great example of how you've done that thing before and you've just totally like hit it out of the park, circle those. And I tell people, pick your top 3. Pick 3 of those things that they want candidates to have. Pick 3 that you have great examples for. That's your cover letter. You are now in your cover letter going to talk about how you've done those 3 things. Take them one at a time, talk about how you've done each one and prove to them, you know, it's this idea of show, don't tell. Show them that you've done that before and how great you are at it and what you accomplished with whatever it is. Give like good concrete examples. And if it gets a little long, maybe only do 2 of them, but I would say 2 or 3 of those things they want you to have. Prove to them in the cover letter you've done those things and you've excelled at it. Give very specific examples. I remember there was somebody I reviewed at convention this year. Normally I don't review people, but we had a scheduling snafu and I reviewed this one guy and he had done it in his cover letter. He had actually done a really nice job with it. And it was very specific. Like the job he was applying for, I think had to do with one of the things they talked about that they wanted that for this position, and I forget what the job title was, but they wanted to increase the profile of their women's basketball program, increase attendance and ticket sales, and just be better known. And it was all about women's basketball. And he had given concrete examples of some of the things he'd done with the women's basketball program at his current institution, like specific things like a day that he created and what came out of that day and a promotion that they did. I mean, like very specific examples of what he had done there. And in fact, I was so impressed with it that I was approached by someone from UCF who said, hey, we're looking for a candidate and you know, this is what we want out of them. And I was like, I talked to that guy today. Like I had him in my resume and cover letter workshop. And long story short, he ended up getting hired by UCF. So and we talked about it afterwards and they were talking about how he just had such good examples for everything they were looking to do for their program. He had done at another school and actually on a completely different level. He had been, I think, at a Division II school and was interviewing at UCF. And this was not the women's basketball position. This was something else, but he had concrete examples for like everything they were hoping to do for their program. And that's what put him over the top. So that's what I would do in your cover letter because you don't have room to do that in your resume. But the cover letter really gives you room to tell that story and to show them that you are the person who can do this job.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, I think that's definitely a great help for those of us who have constantly, you know, struggled, you know, with resumes and cover letters. And so what I want to do is maybe transition to, you know, the interviewing process. So, you know, what are your thoughts on, you know, how to best conduct yourself in a virtual interview, you know, versus an in-person interview?
I would say to try and set yourself up first and foremost in a space that feels, you know, professional. You still dress like you're going to an in-person interview. Try and get somewhere in your house or in your office where you've got decent lighting and, you know, there's not like a bunch of laundry piled up behind you, you know, try to make it look as professional as you can. I work from home, so like this is my video setup. I sit here for everything, but I have other spots in my house that I've used for stuff before where, you know, it's just a nice, like, clean setting. You don't want them to be, and I might actually not sit here for an interview. There's a lot of stuff to be distracted by, which I think is okay for some things and not for others. If I was interviewing, actually, now that I think about it, I probably wouldn't sit here because there's a lot going on behind me. But it's great. I do live videos a lot on Facebook, and this is all great for my live videos. So, you know, try to put yourself in a professional sort of setting, to dress professional. I would do a test ahead of time with a friend or a family member. Make sure they can see you clearly, make sure they can hear you clearly, so that the very first time you're on video isn't for the interview. You know where to look. Like with my setup, my camera is actually on a tripod sitting kind of behind my computer. And so I try really hard to like look into it and not like look at myself, you know, down on the screen. So those are kind of things that you can practice beforehand so that you can get the nerves out, you know how it's going to go, you know what it's going to look like. And then from there, I would treat it just like you would treat an in-person interview. You know, the way that I would answer questions and my demeanor would be exactly the same as it would be in person. And that's a little tough because people can come across stiff on video because like I'm sitting alone in my house. I've got cats running around, you know, I'm talking to, you know, this video camera on my desk. It's a lot different than talking to a person. I have done it for years and I'm used to it. And so I still, you know, use a lot of hand gestures. And I think I talk exactly the same way on here that I would talk if you met me in person. That's not my experience with most people though. So practice it with friends and family and get comfortable with it, because you are not going to be comfortable the very first time you ever do it. There's no way. So you've got to get on and practice it with somebody.
Okay. And what do you feel like there are some common mistakes with in-person interviews?
Ooh, lots. I would say number one is being late. And I would say anything under 10 minutes early is late. I wouldn't get there too early because then you might be catching the person off guard and sort of inconveniencing them because you're too early. But I usually like get there way in advance and then just sit in my car in the parking lot until, you know, it's time to go in, just to ensure that I'm not going to get caught behind a wreck or, you know, all of these unforeseen things, so that you are there on time. Outside of that, biggest mistakes I think usually are a little similar to video and just being a little too stiff, a little too buttoned up. I mean, remember that people want to work with people they like. Okay, they don't just want you to be good at the job. They want to enjoy having the office next door to you or having to sit in team meetings with you. And so you should let them get to know your personality a little bit. Like, I am a very outgoing, like gregarious person. I had an attorney at my first law firm send an email about me that he accidentally copied me on, and he said I was a little much. And I'm sure that's because I'm like always in a good mood and I'm super energetic and like I'm bright and bubbly, and especially in a corporate law environment, that was a little much for him, which is fine. So you want to let a little bit of your personality shine. You want them to know who they're going to be working with. You know, if someone thinks that I'm a little too much, then I probably wasn't a good fit, because this is who I am. So you might as well see it now before I get in and figure out that I hate working here, you hate me working here, we don't gel together. So, you know, really let them get to know you as a person. And I always look for something. I'll read online about, and so that's another mistake, is not looking up the people you're interviewing with. I would always try and get a list of the people you're going to be meeting with and read their bio before you go in. And I always try to pick out one thing from their bio or like something I see in their office that I can talk about that's not just about the job interview. So, you know, if they had something, you know, from Atlanta, I live in Florida now, but let's say I went to an interview here and somebody had like a Braves picture, I'd be like, oh, you know, you're a Braves fan. Are you from Atlanta? I'm from Atlanta. You know, something you can talk to them about that isn't specific to the job, something you might have in common, or there's a picture of them on their honeymoon on the French Riviera, you know, on the wall, and you say, oh, that looks like Nice, I've been there. You know, it's just something that you can talk about outside of the job itself to sort of break the ice, because honestly, sometimes the person who's interviewing you is nervous too. Sometimes they haven't done a lot of interviews, or maybe they got pulled in last minute. You know, it's about building that rapport. door. And again, showing them that you're someone they want to be around every day, because if you get hired, they're going to be around you all the time and they want to work with people they like. So don't get so nervous about the interview that you clam up and you're only, answering what you're asked and you've got these short little answers and they're generic. Like, really try to be comfortable being yourself. And some of that is doing mock interviews and getting used to interviews and anticipating types of questions and having answers ready for those questions. I really do think practice makes perfect. And at convention, you can come do a mock interview if you don't have anybody to do one with.
Wonderful. And so after, one has an interview, so following up after the interview, what is your advice on maybe sending a physical thank you note as opposed to, sending an email? And what is the time frame, that one should, send maybe, a follow-up, thank you note or email?
I am 100% a handwritten note person. There aren't that many people who do it, so it's an easy way to stand out. I try to get them out the same day I have the interview. If I've traveled out of town for the interview, I take note cards with me. If I, something in town, I would do it as soon as I get home. Now, if they're going to be making a decision, let's say you interview Monday and they tell you they're going to be making a decision by Thursday, that the handwritten note probably isn't going to get there that fast by the time it gets there and goes through their mailroom and whatever, who knows how long before they get it. If I know it's a short timeline like that, then what I'll do is when I get home, I will email them and thank them for the interview and say, I have I'm trying to think of exactly how I'd word it, but something like, I sent you a handwritten note as well, but I know it'll take a little bit of time to get to you. So I just wanted to make sure I emailed you and let you know that I enjoyed the interview and I'm still very much interested in the position. So that's the only time I send an email, is if I know they're going to make the decision faster than my handwritten can get there, but I still send the handwritten one anyway. So I've made that a real practice, and everyone I've ever talked to about it has emphasized how few handwritten notes they get and what a huge difference that makes. So I 100% think everyone should be sending handwritten notes after their interviews.
Well, that's definitely some great advice. So what I want to do now is, take some questions from the audience. So one of the questions, I know you mentioned earlier to join, one of the sports, Twitter chats. Can you elaborate more on, the Twitter chats, what it is, how can one search for, the Twitter chats, or maybe what are some popular ones to be a part of?
Yeah, so last I checked, and I haven't looked in probably a year, but last I checked, there were about a dozen different chats in the sports space. Some were very specific about, say, ticket sales, versus one of the oldest one that's been around is SB Chat, which stands for Sports Business Chat. So they run a range of topics, and if you just Google sports Twitter chats, quite a few people have done like roundups on their websites, including me, although I haven't updated mine in years, but I think you'll find where other people have sort of cultivated those lists. And a Twitter chat, they all have an assigned hashtag. So, like the sports business one I was talking about is SB Chat. So most are every week at the same day and time. Some are every other week, and every once in a while I run across one that's once a month, but they're generally every week at the same time. Some have the same people who host them every week. Some people rotate the host. The way you find the chat is on the designated day and time. So let's say it's Sunday nights at 9 o'clock. Sunday night at 9 o'clock, you put in the hashtag in Twitter, or there's several third-party software programs that are specifically for Twitter chats that you can use. You put the hashtag in and you look for somebody, throwing questions out. So usually the way that they do it is they'll write, for the first question, they'll put Q1 instead of writing it out to save characters, because we used to be so constrained on Twitter with our 140 characters. So they'll put, Q1 or question 1, and they'll ask the question. Anyone can jump in and answer the question. All you have to do is you usually want to put A1 so they know you're answering the first question. That way, once the chat gets going, they usually throw out, I would say, 5 to 8 questions over the course of an hour. Once it gets going, it can be a little confusing about what answers go with what questions, especially if they're all around the same kind of theme. So you put A and then the number of whatever the question is, give your answer, and put the hashtag, because the way people are following along with the chat is the hashtag. So if you want everyone to see it, you've got to put the hashtag in your answer, and you can see other people's answers by searching for the hashtag and just watching the feed for that hashtag. You can respond to other people who are in the chat. So, you know, if I saw Erica give an answer and I wanted to piggyback off of it, or I wanted to ask her a follow-up question on it, then I could reply to her directly and ask my follow-up question. I can put the hashtag and it'll show up for everybody to see. And we could maybe end up having a side conversation. And I think that's what happens for a lot of people, is they end up in these side conversations with folks, and it can become a fantastic way to network. And it just gives you that additional opportunity for people to sort of see you and know who you are. For that reason, I would say your Twitter handle should be as close to your real name as you can get. Now, this is a do as I say, not as I do, because my Twitter handle is SportsBizMiss. However, I will tell you that there are disadvantages to that. I've had it for like 12 years, and that was sort of my moniker. I had a TV segment on a regional sports network where I was called the Sports Biz Miss. It was like my gimmick. So it works for me, but I go to conferences and I meet people and I get 10 minutes into a conversation with them and they think they have, you know, that they've never met me, that they have no idea who I am. And then mid-conversation, they'll say, wait a second, are you Sports Biz Miss? They have no idea what my real name is. So they met me at a conference and my name tag says Christy Dosh, but they don't know me as Christy Dosh. So there are times I wish my Twitter handle was Christy Dosh. And I always advise other people, don't try to come up with something cutesy. Use your real name. Use a headshot or a nice clear photo of you, not of your dog, not of your kids. If you're going to use it for professional purposes, like participating in Twitter chats, use some sort of headshot or more professional looking photo. People want to know what you look like, so that if you're then later at a live event or at a conference, they look up your Twitter, your LinkedIn, and they see your picture, and then they can find you in the crowd. I think it's super important to have that be a nice, clear picture of you, and use the profile space where you get to write a little about yourself to tell people where you work and what you do. You know, use it professionally if you're going to join in on these Twitter chats, because what can end up happening is you can make these incredible connections and really network on Twitter without leaving your house. I have a friend who worked in college athletics. She was at Pepperdine and she wanted to work in the NBA. And she did a Twitter chat. This has been like 6 or 7 years ago now. She did a Twitter chat one night and she noticed that an executive from the Boston Celtics was participating in the chat. It was the SB chat, the sports business chat that I told you about. So there's a range of people in that, from like students who are interested in it to high level executives in sports. And this guy from the Celtics was in there. And she made a point of interacting with him in the chat because she knew she wanted to email him later. And she wanted to be able to email him and say, hey, you know, remember me? We talked in the chat the other night. So that's what she did. And she told him, hey, look, I work in college athletics, but I really want to work in the NBA. You know, can I call and chat with you about how you got to where you are? Like, I'm trying to figure out my next steps. She ended up having a phone call with him, and he was so impressed with her that he knew of a job opening with another NBA team, and he called them, and long story short, she ended up getting the job with the other team. So that all came from someone she met on Twitter. And the last time I asked her about it, she still had never met the Boston Celtics guy in person. They had had this like long Twitter relationship, and I have tons of people like that because I've been on Twitter so long. Tim Brando, who's a broadcaster at Fox and was previously at CBS and at ESPN. I had a Twitter relationship with him for years. He started having me on his national radio show. We went like 6 years before we met each other in person. He wrote the foreword for my book before I ever met him in person. So you can create these very powerful relationships from Twitter, but you have to approach Twitter as a professional development tool and not as somewhere that you share what you had for lunch or argue with people about politics or whatever you're using it for right now. You have to approach it as a professional development tool. And if you do, I think there's awesome opportunities to network where you can sit on your couch in your PJs and network, which is the best kind, right?
Of course. So one of the other questions that we have is, how often on average do young athletic administrators move jobs within the first 5 years?
That's a good question. So my brother-in-law and sister-in-law both work in college athletics. My brother-in-law is in strength and conditioning, and my sister-in-law is an assistant commissioner at a conference. So, you know, like these kind of conversations happen in my family all the time, in addition to what I know from just being around the industry. And it's tough because sometimes in order to move up to that next position, you have no choice but to change schools, because the person who's in that position at your current school isn't going anywhere. And in some departments more than others, some people stay like forever. I mean, you have to wait for them to retire before you can get in their position. Like, we see facilities people very rarely move. When I do facilities tours, I'm usually with somebody who's been there 20 or 30 years. We see that a lot with like office admin kind of staff too, but in most of the other departments, you see a little more movement. So depending on the size of the department you're currently in, you could have to move every couple of years to keep moving into that next position. I would say where people get concerned is if you're moving around the 1 year mark, and definitely less than that. But if you're moving like every year, I think people start to worry it's an issue, but they're going to look to see, did you move because you went into a higher position? If every time you move, you sort of upped your game a little bit, people are going to see that on your resume and understand that that's why you moved. But like for my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, because they both work in college athletics, they've moved at different, they've moved up at different rates. So there have been times that one of them has had to hop around faster than they would like to because the other one has been offered like bigger and better opportunities. And that comes back to a cover letter. Like on a resume, it might look like, my brother-in-law has been flaky and keeps changing jobs. If you met him, you'd find out it's because his wife keeps getting these bigger and better assistant commissioner positions, and he's having to move to keep their family together. So that's one of those things you would want to explain in a cover letter too. If you think your movement looks unusual or is happening too quickly and there's a reasonable explanation for it, talk about that in your cover letter and, help ease people's concerns that way. But I would say I see most people move, I'd say every 2 to 5 years, depending on which department they're in. It's part of why I don't want to work in college athletics. I don't want to move that much. To be perfectly honest, it's like reason number one that I haven't and probably won't ever work in college athletics, because I'm not willing to move. And I think you have to be willing to move in order to move up. Very few people are able to stay in one department and continue to move up the ladder, unfortunately.
Okay, and going back to the resume, is it okay to include, any, social media sites like, LinkedIn, or Instagram on, one's resume? And if that's fine, then, where should it be placed?
I would include social media channels if you're using those in a professional manner. If you're using Instagram to like show your dinner every night, then I probably wouldn't put it on your resume. Excuse me. But if you're using Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or LinkedIn or whatever you're using, if you're using it in a very professional way to, share, news and thought leadership pieces around what you do and share what your department is doing and things you're doing related to your job, then absolutely. And I'd say in your header or your footer. I think it just depends on exactly how you've laid yours out and aesthetically how you want to balance it and what looks good to you. But I would say that would be in either the header or the footer. I think that you can, if you know how to do it, you can get the, the logos, and you can do the little logos. You don't necessarily have to like write out Instagram. If you get the little Instagram logo, you can put that and, at Sports Business, and people get, that's my Instagram handle. But I would just put it either in the header or the footer, whichever one looks more aesthetically pleasing to you. But make sure that if you're going to put it on there, not only do you present a professional, sort of front on that social media channel, but also that you're keeping it up. If you're going to put Twitter on there, but you haven't tweeted in 2 years, make sure it's a channel that you are current on. Or if you're going to put LinkedIn on there, like your last job's not even on LinkedIn, which sort of leads me to a side point. Even if you aren't going to put LinkedIn on there, try to keep LinkedIn matching your resume as closely as possible. It doesn't have to be copy and paste the same, but try and have it pretty aligned, because they're going to look you up on the internet in general, and they're going to go check out some of the sites that they find. And if your LinkedIn talks about how passionate you are about being in marketing, but you're applying for a facilities job, that's going to raise some questions. So make sure that if they look you up, you're presenting this very like cohesive front, that who you are on your resume is who they find when they Google you.
Okay, thank you for that great advice. And one final question that I have is, with your, career and, the path that you've taken, as a woman, have you found it, difficult to maybe get into your field, or, transition from one to the other? Do you feel that maybe your male counterparts have, maybe gotten better opportunities? How do you feel, navigating your industry as a woman?
It's a good question. I get it a lot, especially when I go speak to sports management students, women who are sort of worried about whether they want to go into sports or not. So I was on an all-male corporate team when I was an attorney. I have often been the only or like one of 2 women in a press box. And my husband's sports media as well. He's in radio. And he made a really good point to me one time years ago that has always stuck with me. I stand out because I'm female in a good way. I actually think it's helped me far more than it's ever hurt me. And he talks about, like, say they've got a position that opens at their radio station, they get 100 resumes. Like 2 of them on average are from women. He'll actually read them first because like they stand out because it's different. There's a lot of middle-aged white guys who want to work in sports talk radio. He would love to hire anyone but a middle-aged white guy at this point, because he wants to have a diversity of, and he is a middle-aged white guy, but like he wants a diversity of voices on the air, and it's hard to find sometimes. So when he gets a candidate who's either racially diverse, or when he gets a female candidate, it stands out because they get so few, and he wants more of that at the radio station and has a tough time finding it. And he told me early on, and it's part of the reason my Twitter handle is Sports Business. He didn't come up with it, but he said, look, there are really no other female sports business reporters. There are now kind of a few here and there, people who have done it, but I stood out because I was the only woman talking about the business side of sports. When I went to the television station, there was a regional sports network in Atlanta, and I went to them about coming on air for them. They were so excited that I was female because their sports show was for men every night. So I actually think that I have been able to use it to my advantage in most situations. And I've been maybe lucky that I've never had a bad experience with a male colleague or a male boss. And part of it is I don't let that get in my head. I have always worked around all men. I work great with men. I just don't let it affect my mindset around my job. And I think that that's really helped. But I understand why women have concerns about it, and they're valid concerns. But I have, like I said, probably been a little lucky and have worked with some awesome men who have done amazing things for my career.
Well, Chrissy, that has been, some great information. I really just want to take the time to thank you for, taking time out of your schedule to, do this webinar with us and to, give your insight and, expertise. So, you definitely appreciate it. and even, for me, personally, I've definitely, learned a lot just from, listening to you. And, I certainly take that information back and, apply it to myself. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Erica. It was so much fun chatting with you. And thank you to everybody who came live. I appreciate it.
Yes. So everyone, that's all the time that we have for today. So if you aren't following, please follow Chrissy at Sports Biz Miss. And you can also follow Moa at Moa Diversity One on Twitter. And thank you so much. This concludes our webinar.